We ran trade across the dead zones because someone had to. 4 trucks, 2 trailers, 6 people, 1 dog, and not a single working radio between us. That was our convoy. We ran a northern loop through Utah twice a month, cutting through Spanish Fork, Price, up to Vernal, and back west through Roosevelt, sometimes Ogden if the roads were clear. We carried medicine, fuel, preserved food, solar kits, and news. Real news, not the rumors scratched onto plywood or muttered through fences. My name's Tyler Quinn. Before all this, I managed logistics for a regional grocery distributor out of Salt Lake, cold storage, inventory, night dispatch, things that used to matter. Now I'm the guy who keeps the ledger on what we trade and what we're owed. Not that debts mean what they used to. Out here, you settle accounts with bullets or boots. We just left the ruins of Helper that morning, skirting past where the city once tried to burn out a swarm by flooding the rail tunnels with gasoline. Didn't work. All it did was trap them underground, angry and blind. Sometimes you can still hear them clattering beneath the metal grates on the road if the wind dies. I don't linger there anymore. By midday, we hit Soldier Summit and the turnoff toward Schofield. There used to be a checkpoint here. State Guard ran it, at least until the 3rd wave hit in winter and the infected pushed up from the valley. Now the only thing that marks it is a collapsed Humvee half sunk in the snowmelt and a busted satellite dish pointing straight into the dirt. We didn't stop. You learn quickly not to investigate things that already lost the fight. May drove point, her truck painted desert tan with rust blooming under the wheel wells. She used to be National Guard, back when they still wore uniforms and answered calls. Now she just wore a patched vest with the letters UT Patrol stitched in by hand and a Mossberg pump rattling on her seat. She kept her eyes forward and her mouth shut, unless something needed shooting. I sat in the second truck with a guy named Whitlock, a former water engineer out of Moab. He wasn't a fighter, but he knew how to rig filtration kits from scraps and could sweet-talk info out of even the most paranoid gatekeepers. Said he used to work on municipal flow systems. Now he built barter filters and bartered for news. In the truck bed behind us, crates of powdered eggs and canned beef rattled with each pothole. We were heading to the Dry Wells settlement outside Mighton, a place run by a council of ex-preppers who turned a strip of floodplain into a self-sufficient compound. The rules were strict. No weapons inside, no unfiltered newcomers, and no contact without prior notice. But they always paid in antibiotics and diesel, so we played along. We'd sent a runner 3 days ahead with an offer: 2 crates of powdered milk, 1 jerry can of ethanol, and a jar of iodine pills for 2 boxes of amoxicillin and a clean siphon pump. A fair trade. They accepted, but their return note was terse. You'll need to leave one of yours with us overnight, for observation. It didn't say why. May hated it. They think they're safe just because they built a moat and some solar panels, she said that morning while checking her fuel gauge. But that's a power move, Tyler. That's not trade. That's leverage. We parked outside Dry Wells at 1540. Their outer gate was sheet metal welded into a frame of telephone poles, covered with tattered yellow tarps and a row of firewood spikes along the front. 4 sentries watched us from above, rifles slung low. The wind smelled of smoke and sage. A woman named Nora came out to meet us. She wore blue nitrile gloves and a dust mask, even though we stood 20 feet away. One person, she said, no weapons, no gear, stays the night inside. Non-negotiable. You get the rest of the trade tomorrow at noon. May stepped forward, silent. Nora shook her head. Not you, she said, pointing at me. I should have refused. I should have turned around and called off the whole exchange, but we needed the medicine, and I knew May wasn't going to argue. So I agreed. They led me in through the gate and closed it behind me like a submarine hatch. Inside, Dry Wells looked organized. Solar panels, rain catchers, goats in a pen, raised beds of winter wheat under canvas. People moved with purpose, but never spoke unless they had to. It felt like a school after hours. Everything a little too quiet, a little too staged. A man with a handheld scanner greeted me next. Stand still, he said, waving it up and down my torso. It beeped twice. He frowned, then motioned me toward a trailer on the far end of the compound. "You'll stay there." The trailer was windowless, cold inside, with one cot and a jug of water, the door locked from the outside. That's when I knew something was off. I spent the evening listening through the walls. I heard nothing. No radios, no footsteps, not even goats. Just wind and the distant hum of the solar inverters. I didn't sleep. Not really. By dawn, they hadn't brought food and the water jug was half empty. I knocked once. Nothing. Knocked again. After the third time, someone opened the door without warning. It was the same masked man from the gate. He tossed in a box of trail mix and shut the door again without speaking. I waited. At 11:30, someone finally returned, not to release me, to ask questions. They brought in a girl, maybe late 20s, wearing a stitched armband with a red triangle. She sat across from me with a clipboard and didn't introduce herself. "Have you traveled east of the range in the last 30 days?" she asked. "No." "Been in contact with anyone from Price who wasn't tested by us?" "Not that I know of." "Are you immunized?" "Against what?" I said. She didn't answer, just checked a box and asked, "Would you describe your sleep as uninterrupted?" "What is this?" "We don't accept sleepers," she said flatly. "We've had problems before." I didn't understand until later. Sleepers. People who'd been infected in some way but didn't show symptoms for weeks. People who got past barricades only to turn one night with no warning. At noon, they finally let me go. Nora met me at the gate with a sealed box of antibiotics and a worn fuel pump in a plastic bag. "You're clear," she said. "This was for your safety, too." May didn't speak until we were 20 minutes down the road. Then she said, "That's not trade, Ty. That's control disguised as caution. First they test one of us. Next time they keep one." We stayed off the highways after dry wells. The main routes had too many burnt-out overpasses, too many tangled wrecks stuffed with things no one had come back for, shoes, child seats, frozen bags of groceries long since turned to dust. May cut us across smaller roads through Duchesne, then northeast toward La Pointe, keeping us parallel to the river where old ranch fences still stood, like ribs from a buried beast. The thing about running trade out here was you never took the same route twice in a row. Too many watchers. People with binoculars and scoped rifles, waiting for someone else to do the hard work of moving supplies so they could take it the easy way. But more than that, the terrain itself had moods. Roads that were clear last week might be blocked now with downed trees or some settlement's attempt at a barricade. In one spot near Neola, we passed by an abandoned school bus filled with bricks. Just bricks. Stacked to the roof. No explanation, no names. That was the kind of thing you learned to look at only once, then keep moving. We were heading to a camp listed on the old National Guard manifest as U-17, Fossil Ridge Collective, supposedly a ranch commune that had fortified early and stayed low. A convoy from Idaho said they traded there a month ago. Chicken wire, vitamins, and propane for weatherproof blankets. Reasonable people, they said, with clear rules. That was all we wanted. A fair trade, no strings, no watches on our wrists, and no questions about dreams or symptoms. It took us the rest of the day to reach the ridgeline. As we climbed, the temperature dropped fast, and the scent of pine gave way to the sharper, older smell of ash and barn rot. We hit snow patches clinging to the shaded parts of the dirt road. Whitlock slowed to avoid fishtailing the truck, muttering something about needing better tread. May's truck vanished around a bend ahead of us, her brake lights blinking once before going out of sight. For a moment, we lost all radio contact, just static, then silence. When we crested the final slope, we saw Fossil Ridge spread below us. A collection of long rectangular buildings built around a central paddock. 2 grain silos stood at the edge, both marked with faded red paint, a circle with a line through it. Not a symbol I recognized, not military, not rescue, just something homemade, like a warning passed down by word of mouth. They were already waiting for us when we rolled down the gravel path. A dozen people stood in the clearing, all wearing long oilskin coats despite the cold, hands hidden. No visible weapons, But the tension was there, shoulders stiff, faces expressionless. One of them stepped forward and pointed to a spot near the fence line where we were expected to park. No introductions, no questions, just a gesture like we were expected, or at least tolerated. May stepped out first, slowly, both hands visible. She nodded once. I followed, keeping my voice even. We have protein packs, salt tablets, and hard tack, looking to trade for medicine, clean battery cells, or seeds. A tall woman with sunburned cheeks and a gray braid down her back looked us over. She didn't speak. Instead, she turned to a younger man beside her who carried a clipboard and a sealed pouch. He read our offer, then handed it to her. She scanned it, glanced up, and finally said, "You'll deal with Ruth." We didn't know who Ruth was. No one offered to explain. They led us to one of the long buildings at the edge of the clearing. The floor inside was concrete, painted once in green, now chipped and layered with grime. The smell hit immediately. Disinfectant and something else underneath, something like wet dog and rust. Ruth sat behind a desk at the far end of the room, bundled in a scarf and wool coat. She had the kind of posture that didn't bend, and her eyes didn't track you so much as measure. She waved us forward, said nothing for a moment, then tapped the side of her old laptop. "You're the 4th convoy in 2 months," she said. 2 from the north, 1 from Nevada. One of them lied. We don't forget that. May didn't blink. "We're not them." "Doesn't matter," Ruth said. "You brought hard tack?" 24 bricks, I said, wrapped and sealed. She gave the faintest nod, then tapped again on the laptop, scrolling through columns of data. "We don't want seeds. We have our own crop. And we don't want salt. We have a spring. But protein? We'll take that. We have dried raspberries, medical gauze, and alkaline packs for radios." That sounded fair, clean, no threats. But then she added, "One condition. You don't leave until sundown." May stiffened. "Why?" Ruth didn't smile. "Because we said so. We don't negotiate on terms of safety. You'll park inside the perimeter and stay until the sky's clear, then you leave. You try otherwise. Our fence doesn't open again." There wasn't much choice. The others waited outside. Whitlock stood near the trailer, his arms folded, eyes darting between the compound's edges. We agreed to the terms and were escorted to a side barn to wait. They gave us tea, actual tea, steeped with dried citrus, and wood to warm our stove. The windows were barred, but no one locked the door. I sat with my back against the wall and pulled out the ledger. By late afternoon, the tension hadn't lifted. The camp felt still in a way that wasn't peaceful. No kids, no dogs, no chatter, just the muted sound of footfalls and the occasional scrape of shovel on frozen ground. Whitlock leaned close and whispered, "They're too organized, too quiet, like they practiced this." When sunset finally came, the gates opened precisely on time. No send-off, no parting words, just the same cold looks. We rolled out and didn't look back. 10 minutes down the road, May keyed the short-range mic. "That wasn't a collective," she said. "That was a quarantine camp." None of us argued. That night, we made camp far from any roads. May double-checked every door lock on the trucks twice, then sat by the fire without speaking for over an hour. I asked Whitlock what he meant earlier, about them being too quiet. "Places that have lost children sound different," he said after a while. "That place, it's already decided who gets to live. They just haven't told you yet." I didn't record that part in the ledger. I just wrote a line on the back cover. "These people believe in their rules more than they believe in trade. One day, they'll stop trading altogether." We moved west the next morning. A week behind schedule now, fuel running low, and still 2 more settlements to reach. We made the turn toward the desert 2 days later, cutting down past Vernal and then west across a shallow valley littered with the husks of forgotten oil fields. It was the kind of landscape that didn't hold memories, just rust, wind, and silence. All the pumps had long since gone still, and the roads between them were pitted with time and neglect. We passed through Rangeley without stopping, then crossed back into Utah, aiming for a place we'd only heard about secondhand, a community near Tabiona called East Valley Haven. The name alone should have been enough to make us cautious. Places with names like that, Haven, refuge, new hope were almost always compensating for something. Still, we needed the trade. Fuel was down to a third tank per vehicle, and Whitlock had burned through our last working purification filters. More concerning, our cold storage unit had developed a rattle that hinted at a failing compressor. If it went, the meats would spoil before we could get them to the next buyer. We'd been running the compressor off a solar trickle, but the batteries were no longer holding a full charge. That meant more fuel to idle the trucks when parked, and fuel was now more precious than ammo. We didn't go in blind. May had gotten a handwritten map from another runner out of Roosevelt who'd passed through the area last month. It marked East Valley as stable, friendly, but odd. Odd could mean a lot of things out here. We decided to take the risk. The road up to the settlement wasn't paved, just a stretch of wide dirt flattened between stands of cedar and chokecherry. At one point, we had to stop to move a drifted mass of tumbleweeds that had gathered around a rusting tractor, as if nature had tried to hide it from us. When we crested the hilltop, East Valley appeared below us like a misplaced suburb. 9 or 10 clean trailers arranged in a circle, smoke rising in perfect curls from each. There were people outside, too, which was unusual. Survivors didn't gather outdoors anymore unless they were desperate or trying to prove something. And they were smiling. That was the first thing I noticed. Everyone who greeted us at the outer boundary, ropes of braided wire with warning signs drawn in marker, wore these soft, overly polite expressions. Not forced, but maintained, like someone had told them once to keep morale high and they'd never stopped. One woman waved at us before we'd even stopped the truck. A child actually clapped. A man in flannel and a long brown coat stepped forward to greet us. "You're the convoy from the Wasatch Line, right?" he said. "We've heard about you folks, heard you're honest. Come on in." May kept her hand near her belt but gave him a nod. He introduced himself as Bishop. No first name, no last, just Bishop. They didn't search our vehicles, didn't check us for bites, didn't ask for tests. Instead, they invited us to sit down in a central yard, offered coffee steeped in dandelion and pine needles, and asked what we needed. Whitlock gave them our list: fuel cells, water filters, and insulated containers for the food stores. They offered a fair trade on the spot, no negotiations. In fact, they offered more than we expected. Extra jerry cans, double the filters, and even a tin of rare powdered electrolyte tablets. All they asked for in return was shelf-stable protein and any spare reading material we could part with. May was suspicious, but I admit I wasn't. After Dry Wells and Fossil Ridge, it felt like we'd finally run into people who hadn't let the collapse strip their humanity. Maybe that's why I missed the signs early on. They fed us stew that evening. Actual carrots, some kind of cured meat, and barley thickened with dried potatoes. We ate under strings of LED lights powered by wind turbines placed across the ridge. It was more comfort than I'd had in months. We stayed in their guest trailer, which had actual bedding and a working space heater. One of the women, Ava, even apologized that the mattress was a little lumpy. I hadn't heard someone apologize over furniture since before the collapse. But that night, after the meal and the warmth and the stories, I started noticing things. Every home had a curtain drawn over the windows. Not one was open, and the lights, bright during dinner, went dark exactly at 9 p.m. No exceptions. The entire camp shut down as though a switch had been flipped. We sat in our guest trailer in silence for a while. No distant voices, no footsteps. Just the low hum of the turbines above and the occasional creak of wood cooling in the night. At midnight, I stepped out to relieve myself. That's when I saw Bishop. He was standing alone at the outer edge of the camp, just beyond the wire boundary. No flashlight, no coat, just standing and looking into the trees. I thought maybe he was on watch, but there was no rifle, no radio, nothing, just him in the dark. When he turned back and saw me watching, he didn't wave or smile. He just walked back inside without a word. The next morning, our supplies were packed and waiting for us. They insisted we stay for breakfast. More stew, more warmth, more smiles. Then, just before we left, Bishop pulled me aside and handed me a paper envelope sealed with wax. "This is for your record book," he said. "Something to remember us by." I didn't open it until we were 10 miles out, parked under a dead billboard for a resort long gone. That evening, we drove without stopping until our headlights barely lit the road ahead. Nobody said much. Whitlock just kept checking the mirror, like he expected someone to follow. At the edge of Heber City, we camped in the shell of an old tire shop, barricading the doors with stacks of tires and old hydraulic lifts. Inside, I tried to write everything down, but my hand shook for the first time in a long time. Not out of fear exactly, something else. The realization that even the kind ones had rules they wouldn't break, and that somewhere, hidden behind those smiles, they had made peace with whatever those rules protected. We slept in shifts that night, not because of the infected, but because we weren't sure if East Valley had let us leave, or if it simply hadn't needed us to stay. We should have ended the run there. After East Valley, May said we ought to head straight south, cut back through Strawberry Reservoir, and link up with the safe house near Spanish Fork to offload the rest of the goods and refuel. But we had one more planned stop, a camp outside the ruins of Goshen, a newer place, unlisted on most old manifests, but verified by a lone runner who'd joined us weeks earlier for a few days out of Vernal. He called the place Augustine's Bend, said it was run out of an old gravel mine that had been converted into a walled enclave. Supposedly fortified, self-sufficient, willing to trade hardware and rare medical supplies. It sounded too good to be real, but at that point we were tired, running light, and a little too willing to believe in one last clean deal. The approach was straightforward. 20 miles southwest from the highway, following a dirt access road barely wide enough for both wheels. The valley narrowed sharply, and the walls on either side grew steeper, shadows pooling across the truck hoods by early afternoon. Whitlock watched the ridgeline as we went. No birds, no smoke, just wind through the sagebrush and a few collapsed fences littered with bones too sun-bleached to identify. We came to a checkpoint after the second bend. A low metal gate reinforced with logs, 2 men standing on either side with bolt-action rifles and handmade armbands bearing a black spiral. They didn't say much, just waved us in after glancing at our trade manifest. They didn't ask for names, didn't inspect the gear, didn't even comment on the visible weapons in the racks. That should have been the warning, but we'd seen stranger welcomes. The mine itself was set down inside the base of the hill. An old aggregate pit surrounded by stacked trailers, shipping containers, and a central command tent repurposed from what looked like surplus FEMA gear. A mix of faces moved through the space. Older men and women mostly, none under 20, all busy but not hurried. We were directed to a large gravel pad to unload, told someone named Lyle would meet us shortly. In the meantime, a girl no older than 25 brought us water in clean steel cups and pointed out the guest shelter nearby. It wasn't much, just a prefab container with blankets and a diesel stove, but it was better than most. May stayed with the trucks while Whitlock and I followed the girl through the compound. She gave us a polite tour, the storage zone, the clinic, the workshop where they repaired small engines and flashlights. Everything seemed polished. Organized. Their fuel depot was built into the side of the mine wall itself, and the medical room had a battery fridge still humming with power. I couldn't help but admire it, even as something in my gut pulled tight. It was too clean, too quiet. We finally met Lyle in the main command tent. He was an older man, maybe 60, with a voice that still carried the practiced rhythm of someone who once gave orders for a living, maybe military, maybe law enforcement. He didn't say. He greeted us warmly, shook our hands, asked about the road conditions through the canyon, and said he respected what we were doing, keeping the threads of the world stitched together, even when everything else had come undone. We got down to trade. They wanted medicine, our remaining lidocaine, antiseptic sprays, and trauma bandages. In return, they offered not just fuel, but a functioning shortwave transceiver, powered and tuned. It wasn't military grade, but it was more than we'd seen in over a year. That, more than anything, tempted May. With a working transceiver, we could make contact again. Possibly reach the Arizona circuit or even the southern Colorado enclaves. Real connections, not just scratch paper notes and word-of-mouth runners. But Lyle had a condition. "We'll give you the radio," he said, "but we need a favor in return. Nothing dangerous, just a delivery." May said no before I could speak, but Lyle waved her off and smiled. "Just a drop-off," he said. "We need you to bring a package to a site 12 miles west, an old radio tower. Leave it there, that's all." It sounded simple, too simple. No escort, no security, just a drop. "What's in it?" I asked. He smiled again. "Nothing you need to worry about." That should have ended the conversation. It didn't. Whitlock pulled me aside afterward and said the radio was worth it. "We can always dump the package if it smells wrong," he said. "But this could change everything. Think about it, Tyler. Communication again." I thought about it. Then I agreed. May fought it, but I signed off on the deal. We loaded the package, an aluminum crate, heavy, sealed, and unmarked, into the back of the second truck. Lyle gave us coordinates and a rough map. We left at dawn. The road to the tower was a narrow access track half swallowed by brush and thyme. At one point, we had to winch the lead truck out of a washout where the road had collapsed. It delayed us by 3 hours. The crate rattled in the back, and at some point, I swear I heard something shift inside. Not metal on metal. Softer, slower, like sand in a jar. By the time we reached the tower site, it was already past 1400. The structure was still standing, a skeletal frame of aluminum and antenna plates, but the base cabin had partially collapsed. We cleared a space inside, set the crate in the shade, and didn't wait around. The drive back was quiet. May didn't speak the whole time. When we returned, Lyle was waiting. He took one look at the empty truck bed, nodded, and handed over the shortwave set, along with 2 sealed jugs of ethanol and a box of clean water tablets. No fanfare, no threats, just a nod of transaction. That night, we stayed in the guest shelter again. We figured we'd leave early and get back to Spanish Fork before nightfall the next day. But sometime after midnight, we woke to the sound of shouting, not nearby, far across the camp, but urgent. Then came the gunfire. 1, then 2 shots, a pause, then more. May grabbed her rifle and slipped outside. I followed. What we saw made my stomach sink. Down near the lower edge of the mine pit, floodlights had been switched on. People, armed guards, some of the same ones we saw earlier, were clustered around something on the ground. A figure. 2 figures. One was moving, the other wasn't. From this distance, we couldn't make out faces, but we could hear the words. "She opened it," someone shouted. "She opened the damn crate!" Another voice snapped back. "She wasn't supposed to touch it. Lyle said it was sealed." The woman on the ground, whoever she was writhing now, hands clutching at her stomach. Another man tried to restrain her, only to fall back when she began to seize violently. Her back arched. A scream cut the air and then silence. Whitlock stepped up beside me. "We didn't deliver a radio part," he said flatly. "That wasn't some supply drop." May turned slowly. "We delivered something contagious." The guards covered the woman's body with a tarp. Then, without ceremony, 2 others doused the tarp in what looked like kerosene and lit it. The flames rose fast and the smell hit us seconds later. Acrid, sharp, unnatural. Lyle stood nearby, watching without a word. We didn't sleep. We packed before the sun rose and rolled out without saying goodbye. No one stopped us. The radio worked. We fired it up that night from a camp halfway to Santaquin and scanned the frequencies. Most were dead, but on one channel, 7.400 megahertz, we heard something. Confirmed transmission from Ridge 4. Package confirmed delivered. Secondary contact expected by end of cycle. Maintain current lockdown protocols. Then silence again. I closed the ledger. May burned the map to Augustine's site the next morning. Whitlock never spoke about the crate again. None of us did. 4 days later, we reached Spanish Fork. We passed the radio set to a trusted contact who could send messages up the Wasatch Corridor. Then we locked the rest of the supplies and took a week off to recover. That was the last full loop we did together. May left the convoy a month later, said she was heading east, maybe to find out if the Rockies were passable again. Whitlock went south toward Kanab, said he heard about a place with old hydro systems still functioning. I stayed. Someone had to keep the records. Someone had to remember. I still trade. Slower now, smaller runs, fewer stops, more caution, and I've stopped believing in fair deals. Because out here, long after the cities died and the broadcasts went quiet, what killed people wasn't just the infected. It was the rules we made, the ones we enforced on each other and the ones we broke to survive. We traded food for safety, but safety was a lie, and the price was always worse than the dead.